I'm speaking with Anna Baltzer, who just gave a fantastic talk in Guilford, Connecticut, about her experiences in the Palestinian territories. Hi.
Hi, thanks for having me.
A bit about your background to start.
I'm a Jewish American, and I got into this work when I was teaching English in Turkey. I graduated from Columbia University, and on a Fulbright scholarship was in Asia Minor, and I would kind of take trips through the Middle East, and that's when I first started meeting people in Syria and Lebanon and Iran who sort of started to teach me things about the Israel-Palestine conflict that I'd never heard growing up as a Jewish American. That's how I went from being sort of a Jewish American who didn't know much about the Palestinian narrative to working in the territories.
And then eventually you wrote a book.
That's right. After spending 5 months working with a group called the International Women's Peace Service, which documents human rights abuses in the area and supports Palestinians in their nonviolent resistance to the occupation, having spent 5 months there, I got a lot of sort of positive feedback from the sort of emails that I would write back really to my family and friends, such that it was actually good material for a book. I used my photographs and my blog entries to actually make a sort of real narrative, going through.
Why don't you hold the book cover up?
It's called Witness in Palestine, Journal of a Jewish American Woman in the Occupied Territories. And basically, like I said, I mean, it's full of photographs and as well as sort of the things that I started. The things that I saw, my observations, coming as a Jewish American, what things looked like to me. I'd spent time in Israel, I spent time in Palestine, and sort of giving voice to Palestinians whose stories are often never heard, never told in mainstream media in this country.
I want to talk to you about the things you saw. First, what were the dates you were over there?
I originally went for the first time to Palestine. I'd been to Israel before, but to Palestine in late 2003. I stayed for 2 months into early 2004, and then I went back in mid-2005 for 3 months last year. And now I was in Palestine one final time in January during the elections in 2006.
All right, we don't have a lot of time, so we're going to just hit one thing after another. Tell me about checkpoints.
Well, one of the main surprises that I found when I was in Palestine was that I had originally thought that checkpoints, where Palestinians are basically screened by the Israeli military, I had assumed that they were sort of on the border between Palestine and Israel, Palestinian territories and Israel, and it turns out that the vast majority of these checkpoints are not located around the border, but actually within the Palestinian territories, between Palestinian towns and villages, which means that Palestinians cannot go from their village to the nearest city or to the village next door without often being screened, held up for hours, an entire day even. So it's preventing Palestinians from sort of getting an education, getting to classes, going to work, getting to the hospital in a timely manner, going to a funeral, anything that so Palestinians, their daily lives are not able to sort of function normally because of these checkpoints.
And you told a really terrible story about a woman trying to give birth.
Yeah, outside of the village of Deir Balut, the checkpoint there, it's anyone who wants to leave the village has to pass through it, and it's open from 7 a.m. until 7 p.m. But that means that anyone who has any kind of emergency after 7 p.m., is kind of out of luck. And what happened was this woman, she was 7 months pregnant with twins, began to have contractions in the middle of the night. Her husband drove her to the checkpoint, which they needed to cross to reach the nearest city of Ramallah, where the nearest hospital was. And the soldiers came down and they said basically, look, the rule's very clear. Palestinians can't cross until 7 in the morning. Come back at 7. Well, they couldn't wait 6 hours, and eventually they kind of had an ambulance come from Ramallah to the checkpoint, hoping that then the woman could just go from her own car to the ambulance and be shuttled back to Ramallah, but that still didn't work. And the soldiers, they were like, we didn't make the rules, but look, we're just following orders. That's all we're doing. And they kept saying, we're just following orders. We're just following orders. And anyway, eventually they were able to contact somebody to finally allow this woman through, but she'd been waiting for 2 hours. And when she eventually gave birth to the twins in the ambulance, the twins were born alive, but they were desperately in need of hospital care because they were premature. And because they'd been waiting for 2 hours at the checkpoint, they weren't able to reach the hospital in time, and both of the women's babies died, actually.
Let's talk about roadblocks. They were all over in the pictures you showed at the meeting.
That's right. That's the other sort of part of restricted movement in the territories. And roadblocks are kind of placed on Palestinian roads to prevent Palestinians from using their vehicles on their roads. So, for example, it'll mean that instead of taking a short road, people have to take a long detour around to get to the exact same place. Or it'll mean that instead of being able to take your car from your house to your place of work, you'll have to drive your car to a roadblock, park it, and then walk around by foot and take a taxi the rest of the way or hike the rest of the way. And so these roadblocks are just simply a way of preventing Palestinians from easily moving from one place to another. And actually, economically, it's an issue because you can't transport products very easily. People have to actually manually carry them over the roadblocks. People have to carry bodies over the roadblocks because an ambulance will have to transport it to another ambulance to get to a hospital. So this is just another institution in the occupation.
Well, how do these checkpoints and roadblocks within Palestinian areas, how does that help Israeli security?
That's one of the main questions. These institutions are supposed to be about safety and security for Israel, but how does blocking a Palestinian road, making it so that people have to walk the rest of the way to work or to school, how does that secure Israelis? If it were between Palestine and Israel, there could be a case there's crossing any border in any country, you have to go through a kind of security. But it's between a Palestinian village and a Palestinian city. Holding up an ambulance, preventing it from getting to the hospital, that's not helping Israeli people. It's about control.
Now you showed a map of the West Bank full of all kinds of settlements, and then you had some pictures of outposts. What are they?
So a lot of people know about settlements, which is where you have Jewish Israelis who are living on Palestinian territory in kind of recognized cities and towns. But the outposts are actually kind of the beginning, oftentimes, of settlements, where actually just a few settlers will actually come in the middle of the night and kind of just establish themselves on a plot of Palestinian land. And since the Israeli government doesn't kind of force them to leave, over time they begin to grow and become actually settlements. But the outposts, the people who choose to move into them, I think are different from most settlers. Most settlers are moving oftentimes for economic reasons, whereas these settlers oftentimes for religious reasons, fundamentalist sort of ideological reasons, and it can be actually very violent towards the Palestinian population in these territories.
You had an example of a village that was terrorized by these settlers.
There are villages where the settlers will come down with guns and threaten farmers. They've killed farmers before. There was in one village where I spent some time, the settlers had poisoned the land of the village to prevent shepherds from bringing their sheep in hopes that the shepherds...
Poison? How did they poison them?
They took barley and they boiled it in rat poison, and they put it underneath shrubs so that if shepherds brought their sheep to their land, their sheep would die. And actually their animals were dying, and in an effort to prevent shepherds from coming to their land, to make people leave their land in hopes of actually acquiring that land.